Two senior U.S. vaccine regulators who are leaving the FDA have come out against the White House plan to administer COVID-19 booster shots to all eligible Americans. The regulators, along with a group of 16 other international scientists, published their research in Lancet yesterday. In it, they conclude that while a third dose is beneficial to the immunocompromised, the average person does not yet need it. The paper presents a challenge to the FDA and the Biden administration just days before an external agency panel is set to review the case for COVID boosters. To discuss this, let's bring in Dr. Mark Kline. He's the physician-in-chief at the Children's Hospital in New Orleans. So, doctor, explain how these scientists came to this conclusion. Most people will say that there has been confusion in general because you do have the CDC and our infectious disease experts like Dr. Fauci and others suggesting that at some point all Americans will need COVID boosters, not just the immunocompromised. And then you get scientists like this who say, hold on, the immunocompromised, yes, but not everybody else. So what should we take away from this?
Well, Vlad, I think these are the nuances of science. There was really no new data presented in this paper. It was more of the flavor of an op-ed piece. And I think it's useful as a contribution to the dialogue. But, we're looking at a variety of subpopulations. We know that when breakthrough infections occur, and they do seem to be occurring with somewhat increased frequency, the longer we're out from immunization, they're affecting older people more severely, people who are immune compromised and may not have had an optimal response to the vaccination in the first place. And so it may well be that once the FDA has an opportunity to review all of the data and the advisory committee of the CDC looks at this, that they recommend boosters for some groups of people and not for others. But I think we've just got to give it a little bit of time and let the experts review all of the data and come to the best decision that they can. We all want to do the right thing. I do worry about healthcare professionals who were in the first wave to receive vaccination back in December of 2020 and January of 2021. And as I said before, I worry about older people who seem to have waning immunity now that they are 6 or 7 or 8 months out from vaccination.
Doctor, I have kind of a two-part question about vaccines for children, right? There's kind of a bit of a timeline out there that suggests we may see a vaccine available for kids under 12 by Halloween, maybe. So I want to ask you if you think that timeline is realistic. And then I want to ask you something else. I had been listening to some conversations, people talking about children being vaccinated. And there is this argument out there that children are not as susceptible to the most extreme outcomes when it comes to COVID. And that the real way to tackle a virus like this is not necessarily just with vaccines, but with a natural immunity, meaning allow children to contract it because they probably are not going to get sick, and we stand a greater chance of getting a handle on this pandemic. So I want to ask you kind of both questions. When do you think we could see a vaccine for kids? And is a vaccine for kids a good idea if we want to have this pandemic come to an end?
Yeah, those are both very good questions. First, pertaining to the timing, your guess probably is as good as mine. Dr. Walensky of the CDC has said maybe by the end of the year we will see vaccines for children 5 to 11 years of age. Some others have predicted a somewhat shorter timeline, perhaps end of October or early November. I'm growing a little impatient, to be honest with you. We're nearly a year out, or at least approaching a year out from emergency use approval of the vaccine in adults. Why is it taking a year? We don't really need to recreate all of the efficacy studies. We know that these vaccines are effective. We just need to know the correct dose, and we need to know that there aren't any special safety considerations for children. And I feel like I've seen this movie before. I was taking care of children with HIV and AIDS in the 1990s when highly active antiretroviral therapy came along, and it was available for the parents much sooner than it was for children. We didn't have pediatric formulations, and we didn't have guidance on dosing and side effects, and children died as a consequence. And so I feel like with the numbers we're seeing in children right now, we've seen a tenfold increase in the number of COVID cases in children under 4 years of age since the Delta variant came along. A fourfold increase in the number of cases among 5 to 11-year-olds just over the past 8 weeks. We need to have some protection to offer these children. They are the only group that currently have no options for protection from the virus. As to the second part of your question, natural immunity is not the answer here. Although most children recover uneventfully from COVID, thankfully, a number do require hospitalization. And as I just pointed out, hospitalizations are up dramatically with the advent of the Delta variant. Some children end up in the ICU. We have a child today in our ICU here at Children's Hospital New Orleans who is on heart-lung bypass, which is sort of a last-ditch effort to support failing heart and lungs. And some children die. And so if we're going to approach this through natural immunity alone, we are going to see a lot of very ill children, some with long-term or maybe even lifelong side effects, and we're going to see some deaths. And I don't think any of us want to see that.
Doctor, when you are faced with a situation like the one you just mentioned, a child who is in dire straits like that, and then you realize that it doesn't have to be this way. This vaccine is available to everyone in this country. It's a little like having the polio vaccine available in the 1950s. I don't think that there was one family in this country who did not line up the minute that those vaccines were available. I've had people in my own family describe what it was like in school back in the 1950s. Once that vaccine became available, you lined up in the cafeteria and kids were administered a sugar cube. And, I don't even know if I asked people, was there a letter that went out to parents saying we're going to be giving this medication to kids? And they don't recall that. I don't know if there was. In other words, parents just said, yes, this is life-saving for my children, sign me up. Does it frustrate you when you have a child in your hospital who's in such dire straits, when you realize it didn't have to be this way?
It does, Vlad. It's very, very disappointing because we know we have the tools to put this pandemic behind us, but we're not really using those tools. And to see children sick and in some cases even dying unnecessarily is just a tragedy that is beyond words. It frustrates the doctors and the nurses. It exhausts all of us. I don't think we've ever seen this degree of skepticism around a vaccine or a medical advance in the past. And so I'd like to understand better why there is so much skepticism, why the polarization exists as it does, why there has been so much vehement objection to something as simple as wearing a piece of cloth over your nose and mouth to preserve your own health and the health of people in your community. I really don't have a good understanding of any of those things. I don't pass judgment on people who are skeptical. I know that they are hearing other voices on social media and maybe on television too that are telling them things quite different than what I say. But we've got to get the message across in a better way. If we don't get more people vaccinated, if we don't wear masks more consistently, we are going to be in a perpetual cycle of surges of new variants of COVID-19. And the new variants, by the way, are likely to be ever more sinister than the ones we've dealt with up until now. If we thought Delta was bad, we may be encountering something far worse in the future. And so we've got a lot of work to do. I think your program and many others are doing a good job of getting accurate information out there. But it's just, when you stop to think that there are a lot of people who have rejected the vaccines that have been through controlled trials and whose efficacy and safety is very well documented at this point, but are willing to take an anti-parasite drug that's given to livestock as a treatment for COVID. I mean, how do you put those two facts together and find any logic in it?
Yeah, and that's always the case, right? The amount of stuff that we put in our bodies that we don't know anything about the science to back it up. And yet there are people who are skeptical of the vaccine. Dr. Mark Kline, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.